soyez les bienvenus à ma chaîne. Moi, c'est Dorcas, l'autodidacte francophone, et aujourd'hui, on va parler sur quelque chose intéressant, divertissant en anglais. You're welcome to the channel. This is Dorcas, the self-taught language student. I always wonder why we don't have that word autodidact. In English, we say self-taught. In French, it is autodidact. But you get the idea. When you teach yourself something, you're self-taught. In Romance language, we say autodidact. So self-taught, right? And over the years, I've been leisurely learning languages. I say leisurely because I'm not under pressure to learn any language. I think the only time I was under pressure to learn a language was when I came to Ecuador and I had to learn um, Portuguese. Portuguese. I had to learn Spanish. I arrived here. If this is not your first time, you already know. I arrived here with, I can say 0.0.00199925% of English language, of Portuguese, of Spanish. Okay, I just finished talking about Portuguese, so in case you hear me saying Portuguese, but I had very little understanding of Portuguese, of Spanish, so that I had to learn under pressure, which in a way was good, you know, um, because I was bombarded with the language. I was surrounded by the language. I was living amongst the language learners, which basically is how I learned English language because my parents are not English. My parents are Francophones from the Congo, but because I was born and raised in an English country, automatically I picked it up. And I think that's what also happened for me here in Ecuador with Spanish. I was, um, speaking Spanish. Hi, Tamfan, welcome. I was just forced to speak the language because I needed, it was a need, okay? So I think it came easy, and I would say a lot of people said it's a gift. If you're on the spiritual side, you know. For some people, language learning comes easy. For me, it's one of the things that comes easy for me. And so because of that, I've learned a few African languages along the way on life's journey, you know. But this year, I just discovered that there is a difference between learning a new language and learning how to speak. So everybody grows up learning their mother tongue, you know, their first language, which is basically what the people who raise you speak, you know, probably English, French, whatever, you know, Yoruba, name it. And that's your first language. Now, when you are learning that language, you are learning how to speak. You're basically learning how to talk, right? You're trying to communicate using your lips and your tongue. I think that's why we call it mother tongue, because it is what the child learns on the laps of its mother, right? So you're learning how to talk. But when you're acquiring a second language now, you can talk. The only thing is that you cannot speak in the language that you want to speak in. So, for example, a French person cannot communicate verbally in whatever language, Spanish or German or whatever the case may be. And those are two different things. And I think for me, that is the barrier or the hindrance that stops people from learning a different language or a new language, because already they can talk, they can communicate. So the thing is, why should I start looking for a new language to communicate in when I already have one that I can use, right? And when you learn a language, then you have to learn how to speak in that language. And when I'm talking about speaking, I'm not talking about learning words. I'm talking about learning what words mean in that language, the impact words carry in a certain language, the emotions they evoke, your understanding, their understanding, your accent, your intonation, your phrase. There is a language in a language, for example, hi Taylor, how are you? There is a language in a language. So, for example, when someone is angry in English language, you will say them. When you say them, that is kind of strong language, right? We say strong language. And then it can be strong language just because of your accent, the way you pronounce that word, you know. And then there's a way you would say damn in admiration. That happens also in your second or third language, and so you learn those things in your primary language. It grows with you because when you are growing up in a house with children, you don't say that that is bad language. You don't use those words in this house, things like that. And you grow and you are learning what is allowed, what is not allowed, what is used, what is not used. And that is the cultural part of language learning that I think is the second reason why we don't or we are afraid of learning a new language. Because in our mother tongue or in our first language, there is a way we can express our emotions. We know the way to express emotions. We know how to express anger without being rude verbally. We know how to express joy without being excessively lewd, so to say. But with decorum, you can express your emotions with decorum in your mother tongue, in your language, which is a thing that takes time to cultivate in a new language, right? And so that kind of hinders our journey when we are learning a new language. And I'll give you an example. When I came to Ecuador, one of the things that really irritated me, and it still irritates me till today, is the fact that when you get on the buses, you will find people who will just spit on the bus without scruples. They have no qualms, just and spit it on the ground. It's allowed here in the city where I live. People don't frown at it. The first time we saw that with my husband, it was like, you know, but at the time, because Spanish was the second language to us, we didn't have the words or the body language, sorry, the words or the mannerism to express our disgust. Okay, so today you can just look at it and just say asqueroso. You just say asqueroso and you've said 1,000 words without being vulgar, without being rude. But at the same time, I wouldn't say asqueroso to anybody who did that on the bus simply because I'm not Ecuadorian, and by Ecuadorian standard or Guayaquil standard, it's allowed, you know. And those are the little aspects of language learning that hinder us from making progress, because a language is supposed to carry your emotion as well as your logic. It's supposed to transmit it to the person listening, right? So that hinders us. Now, another thing is sometimes you look at a language and you think, okay, because it sounds like a certain language, so it should be easy to learn. Mm-mm. This year, I took the time to study, decided to start learning Portuguese. And Portuguese, for those of you who know, is a language that we speak back home on the African continent. But Portuguese, when you listen to their songs, or you even read, you will find out that there are a lot of words that are used in Spanish. And so I thought, because now I've been speaking Spanish for over 5 years, I would be able to learn Portuguese like just fly by night, And it's funny because when I was learning Italian, I took it as a child who was learning how to speak. I didn't know nothing. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know its origin. I just knew it was one of the languages that came out of Latin. So they call them Neo-Latin languages. and I loved the language. That was the only information I had at the time that helped me to persevere in acquiring that language. But for some reason, I just assumed, well, I speak Spanish very well now. I should be able to speak Portuguese. No, it doesn't work that way. And so, what I have learned is that when you know a language, even though it's similar to the language that you speak or that you know, um, it doesn't necessarily mean that it helps you to learn a new language, because there is learning a language and there is speaking the language. And it's the same thing with Portuguese and Spanish. Just because I thought because Spanish was easy to learn, so Portuguese would be easy to learn. Because, like I said, when you look at them as at face value, they look very, very close. And I still maintain that Spanish and Portuguese are very similar. However, their grammar rules are not the same. They are very, very distinct. They are very, very diverse. It's not as phonetics. When I say it, I'm referring to Portuguese. It is not as phonetic as Spanish is. Spanish is literally a very phonetic language. That is, you write the way you speak, you see a word, you can pronounce it, and off you go. The only thing you need to do with Spanish is to learn one, the grammar rules, which I think once you can master the conjugations, you should be able to speak Spanish. Present sim. I always tell my students present, past, future. That is what we usually talk about. The conditional, yeah, if you're going to plunge into that depth, you would learn it. It's not really hard either. But once in you realize that you talk about the present, the past, the future, and you learn how to conjugate in those time tenses, those verb tenses rather, you're good to go. You know, with Portuguese, however, I'm finding that it is much simpler in Brazilian Portuguese to conjugate, because Brazilian Portuguese makes use of just four pronouns, you know. And today I was listening to another teacher explaining the conjugation rules, and he was saying that, you know, even though they are aware of it, they deliberately don't use it. And for me, that was so beautiful, because that is what that deliberate error in grammar is what makes their Portuguese theirs, you know, and is what makes language a property, or that version of the language a property of its speakers, you know. And that was so beautiful, which then makes it difficult for me as a beginner to want to apply the ease of learning Spanish to my Portuguese learning experience, you know. And so I was talking with ChatGPT, and I was saying, I think I overestimated the pace or the speed with which I was going to acquire Portuguese. So I think what I'm trying to say is that I was learning Portuguese in too passive a manner, that I wasn't really reproducing it. So because I thought that I understood Spanish. That's what I'm trying to say. So I would just put on a podcast or a video, which I couldn't do at first, but with time I could be able to discern what they were saying and hear the closeness it had to Spanish, and guess more or less what the person was talking about. And that felt like learning process until after 2 months, and I wasn't speaking. I couldn't speak. I couldn't speak properly even, you know, and I wasn't even retaining. And so I was like, okay, we've been playing. We think we are learning, but we've been playing. And it's funny because I've never spoken Portuguese before. I know people who speak Portuguese, but the levity with which I was handling the learning process is what is I'm trying to share with you. That it's baffling, because you can talk but you can't speak, you know. And so I had to, in the last couple of weeks, sit down and actively learn to say, okay, I can understand now, which is the first progress, because at the beginning I couldn't even make it. It felt like they were speaking in tongues. If you're religious, it felt that way, that they were just and I just I was lost. I had to listen with subtitles, which it's good. It's good if you're beginning, but I think watching with subtitles kind of makes you slower, in the sense that you become dependent on the subtitles as opposed to allowing your brain to interpret or understand what the person is saying for itself. So I don't listen. I try to avoid subtitles as much as I can. What I rather do is pause the lesson and figure out, and that is where my knowledge of Spanish helps now and then. Where you say, okay, let me pause and see. They said and town, and you look at the context and say, okay, and town, what would be the closest thing to town in Portuguese or in Spanish? Or entonces. Oh, okay, so we move ahead. So I used to do that a lot with when I started listening to Italian, but now I don't do that anymore. I try to just listen and let my brain, interpret. So now, instead of just listening passively, expecting for Portuguese to get embedded in my brain as if it was some chip. I am now actively learning it the way a child is learning how to speak, the way a child will say, mommy, I want sleep, mommy, I sleeping now, mommy, I sleeping now, and make those mistakes, not minding the grammar, this thing. So, I like that. So, what I'm trying to say is, when you are learning a language that is similar to the language you speak already, so say for example it's close to your first language, or it's close to your second language, um, don't take it with levity. One, two, don't expect that because you understand your second language very well, you will now understand the third language or the subsequent language with much ease, just because the two languages are easier. I don't know what other language to compare. I think maybe Dutch and English, I'm not sure, you know. So there is that approach. I think is the approach to learning a new language, to say because I speak French, so because French is close to Italian, therefore um, I'm going to learn it as quickly as I learned French, or I'm going to speak it as quickly as I spoke French just because I learned it in 2 months or something like that. And um, the another thing I wanted to share with you is that when you begin to see the very fact that you can realize the difficulties in your language learning progress is just your brain trying to create a map for you to say, okay, we are not getting the conjugation right, or this grammar rules does not apply to our own grammar rules. And when I say our grammar rules, I mean the language you already speak. And so we have to like put it in one corner or in a box and then learn completely these new rules, even though in general the language sounds similar. So which is what I've had to do. Like now I know that completely I cannot in any way bring Spanish grammar rules to Portuguese learning. Neither can I even think of using Italian, even though some of the tenses in Portuguese match the tenses in Italian, but they don't work the same way, especially with Brazilian Portuguese. Brazilian Portuguese has a lot of African influence, if you are aware of that. I don't know. And that is what makes it beautiful on its own. It's very, very distinct from the European Portuguese, which in my opinion, probably because I speak French, it's more close to French. And I think I may be right in the sense that they are both European languages, as opposed to the Portuguese that majority of black people speak in Brazil, right? And you should know that in Brazil, there's been a lot of black languages. There were black native settlers there. There were black settlers there that have influenced how Brazil's Portuguese has been cultivated. In fact, right there in Brazil, you have the Portuguese spoken in the south, which is slightly different in accent, pronunciation, some grammar rules here and there than the one from the one spoken in the north, things like that. And so you have to just learn how to speak a certain to speak the Brazil. So if you're speaking um, European Portuguese, stick with your European Portuguese. Learn the rules of European Portuguese, because at the end of the day, the Brazilian will understand you. And if you choose that you're going to speak Brazilian Portuguese, stick to Brazilian Portuguese, because the Portuguese of Portugal will understand you. It's the same thing with speaking your version of English. I tell my students each time I have a new student, they want to ask me, do you speak British English or do you speak American English? And I tell them, I speak African English. I'm African. However, my African English has been influenced by the British, because we were colonized by the British, and so I would use a lot of British words, and so that is not the problem. The problem is that as an African, I can be understood in Australia, I can be understood in New Zealand, I can speak to a Japanese who understands English, because we have tried to speak the standard English, the grammatical English. It will be a different ball game if I went to Japan and tried to speak pidgin English to a Japanese who speaks English, because that is not the standard. And so I think that is the issue. Learn the standard. There is no good or bad English. And I'm saying this because most of the people here, I think, are maybe Spanish people, I'm guessing Spanish speakers who are learning English. There is no standard per se. The main thing is for you to be understood by your speaker. If you want to acquire an accent, that is where the speaking comes. Once you can talk in English, you can communicate, which is the talking part. Then the speaking part is your choice. I always tell my students, learn the basic, get used to it, perfect your rules, your understanding of grammar rules in English language. Once you have that solid, whatever accent you want to take is yours. It's surprising because I even found that out in French. You go to France, everybody have their dialect, they have their pronunciation, and it began to make me realize probably that is what influenced the way we all speak these foreign languages on the African continent. To say maybe the colonial master that ruled in North Cameroon was from, where do I know, from Normandy, and the one who ruled the other part of Cameroon was from Paris. For example, in Congo, it was French, but French Belgium. Until tomorrow, we will still say 6011, 6012, because that was how we spoke. But if I went to Canada or I went to France and I said 6011, they know I'm talking about 71. That is that is at the end of the day what matters when you're learning a language. What matters is how to express yourself. Expressing yourself intellectually, like I said at the beginning, expressing yourself emotionally, respectfully, with compassion, with understanding, with consideration for the person, for their culture. That's why I told you at the beginning, even though now I know how to say I find something disgusting, I don't think I would say asqueroso to a Spanish person, except if I was telling a story, of course. I would express that, but I can always express my frustration now. I can caution someone or reprimand someone who was treating me or dealing with me in a disrespectful manner. I can be able to, verbalize my displeasure politely without being vulgar because now I understand more. So I can speak now Spanish. I can say I speak Spanish, right? Yeah. So that's just what I wanted to tell you, that there's a difference between the difference between your mother tongue or your first primary language or your most dominant language, if you speak many languages like myself, is the fact that you talk with your first or mother tongue or primary language, and you have to learn how to speak in a new language. And those are the two different, the two sides of language learning: talking and speaking. Okay, so where you can express yourself, express your emotion in consideration of the person who is listening or the people who are listening to you. That is very, very important. And to me, that is where language becomes an integral part of culture, that a word may exist, but we don't use it because culturally it signifies XQY, and so we wouldn't use it every day because it's a strong language, or because it's vulgar, or because it's too elevated and people think you're trying to you know, look down on them, like there are words I've never heard here as an interpreter, and I realize it's just because the people I'm talking to are simple folks. They are not academicians. So probably if I was talking to academicians, it will be common language, So sometimes I have to calm down because I've learned textbook um, Spanish. So I'm speaking standard Spanish, not Ecuadorian Spanish. So there is that aspect to say, okay, I have to speak now, even though I can communicate because of the standard Spanish, but I want to be able to speak Ecuadorian Spanish and say, okay, I understand this is part of your culture. This is who you guys are as a people. This is how we say. For example, when we say I'm broke in English, broke is not that something is we are literally broken. Broke. When you say I'm broke, it means you don't have money. But in the bank, you wouldn't go tell the bank manager I'm broke, I need a loan. No, you will say I'm financially handicapped or I'm in need of financial assistance. Can I get a loan? And the same thing here on the street. You rarely hear people say I don't have money. When they are really broke, they say, estoy chira, and they do this. That is a sign. So that is a culture. It's a friendly way of just saying, like, I'm gone, gone, gone. Whereas where I come from, when you do this, you are saying you're going to kill the person, and things like that. So that's the difference, guys. There's between talking and speaking in a language for the people to understand you. I hope you liked it. If you're not subscribed, I'll be very glad if you subscribe. Do not forget to like the video. It helps YouTube, it helps the algorithm. I'm trying to build a channel, and I will be seeing you guys very, very soon. Bye bye. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday.